Appreciate everyone being here tonight. I do want to start off with just a quick announcement. We are telecasting this, recording it on Zoom as well. We're good to go. Thank you for that. So again, good evening and welcome. So obviously we're here to talk about Penngrove traffic. We all acknowledge that traffic is a big concern for those who live in and around Penngrove. Congestion, speed, safety, all of it. We've also had conversations about where to prioritize investments, and quite honestly, we always have limited resources to relieve that congestion or reduce and control speed of the vehicles and improve safety. Last August, the board authorized funds to enter a contract to perform a traffic study in and around Penngrove. That traffic study is underway. It's anticipated to be finalized later this year, fall, plus or minus. Tonight's town hall is to receive your input, hear your concerns regarding traffic conditions in the Penngrove traffic study area. If you have not already done so, if you've not already submitted your opinion, tonight is a great opportunity to do so. We'll be doing that during the public comment on traffic study section a little bit later. If your comments are already in, you're more than welcome to speak tonight. Duplicative comments will be adjusted as they go forward, so just keep that in mind. We're going to start off with a brief overview on how traffic speeds are set in the state of California. Actually, we're going to adjust this right off the bat, and I'm going to introduce Dave Hoff. And Lieutenant Dave Hoff, he's a lieutenant for 2 more months before he becomes a captain, so congratulations to Dave, a South County native here. He is our commander of the Santa Rosa area CHP. So he is the man responsible for the traffic control in and around Penngrove. And because Dave has a tight schedule tonight and has to be somewhere else, we're going to give him an opportunity to talk briefly about how traffic enforcement takes place here. And if you have any quick questions for Dave before he leaves, now's the opportunity. Dave?
Thank you, sir. Thank you to Supervisor Rabbit's office for putting this together. This is kind of a new thing for me, being a commander, and so I got to get used to this town hall meeting thing. One thing I will tell you, this is nice to see that all of you people are obviously very concerned about the safety of your community here in Penngrove. So I see all the heads going up and down. So I'm glad to be with you tonight. I don't have a whole lot prepared. I can answer some questions for you if you'd like. I will tell you that I've been in and around Sonoma County for about 25 years, so I too am invested in the safety of our communities. I've got a wife and 2 small kids that run around this community, so I'm very vested in the safety of this community. I've lived in Petaluma for 20 years, so I'm quite familiar with the area. I know that you all work very closely with Supervisor Rabbit's office, and I've started to hear some of your concerns and things we can address. I'm not sure what I can tell you right at the outset here, but I'm happy to answer any questions about what's going on with the Highway Patrol, about what's going on in Penngrove as far as traffic that I can do for you. So if anyone's got anything, I'm happy to talk about it.
Does anyone have anything for the commander before he takes off?
Oh, I knew it. Somebody's got to have some stuff.
Yeah. Hold on, we're going to do it with the microphone because we have people online. I'll hold it if you don't mind.
My name is Molly Mazzella, and I live on Woodward Avenue, and I'm really annoyed about this. I've dealt with this AB 43 before, and I think it's not a good logical way to run our traffic. All it does is promote the increase of speeds, and it's very frustrating. I've called Clyde at the county office about the funky signage out on Old Red. I mean, it goes from 45 to 50 for like 10 feet, and then it goes down to 35 right before the stop sign. And he once again quotes this. It has no basis in common sense to my way of thinking.
Appreciate that. That's not really Dave's piece. We'll come back and we'll talk. AB 43 is a new way to set speed limits. Dave, do you have anything on that?
I don't. I just was reading about that the other day, as a matter of fact, but it sounds like you have some allies there with the claps. So
yeah. Eris?
Thanks. I'm Eris Weaver. I'm the executive director of the Sonoma County Bicycle Coalition.
Madam?
And I expect we may, talk offline about this. But
sure.
One of the enforcement issues that I deal with as a cyclist is obstructions in the bike lane. I've never yet been able to get anyone cited for that. and
You mean like
issue-
cars parked and stuff like that?
Yes, cars, garbage cans,
Sure.
you know, all of those things that then on streets like this, I live here in this study area and ride these roads every day, and that pushes us out into the traffic, but I've never seen any enforcement around that.
Okay?
Thanks, Harris.
I'll make a note of that for the officers that work in this area.
Rick?
Thank you, Supervisor. Just quickly related to the bicycle lanes, I did want to point out in terms of continuity of documents, there may be a conflict in that on Main Street we're Class 3. There are no Class 1 or 2 bike lanes. And of course, that could be amended, but that's documents. But Dave, thanks for coming.
Certainly.
And I do understand, too, when anything changes in the system, as you know, the governor passed two new, and the state passed not only AB 43, but 773. And apparently, agencies like the city of San Francisco are already moving ahead on a different timeline with 773. And it takes time for all of to get through all the agencies in California and as it rolls out in our complex system. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, questions for Dave on enforcement would be ideal.
My name is Patrick Lynch. I live on Brand Lane, and I do a lot of walking around this neighborhood. I walk on Brand Lane, down Dutch, down Davis, on a regular basis, pretty much every day. I've been almost hit on a number of occasions walking down that way, and I've called law enforcement. I've asked them, they've asked me if I've been hurt, and I told them no, but they're very close to it. So I don't want someone to be calling up for me to say that I'm laying in the side of the ditch, maimed, dead, or something else. We have a lot of children that live around next to me on Brand Lane, on Dutch Lane, and across the road, and a lot of old people that walk down like myself. You know, I'm no young spring chicken either. You know, so traffic, they run through the stop signs. I've been at a stop sign going across the road. They'll pass by 1, 2, 3 cars in a row, and they won't stop. And they just look at, if you try to flag them down, they'll just give you the and say, hey, you know, this is the kind of crap that goes on here. It's been going on here for years, you know, and that's what I would like to see. And I'm sure everybody else around here, I speak for a lot of people that I've spoke with, you know, their children they have to watch them. They can't let them outside their gates coming down the road because they might get run over. So I would appreciate if something would be done about this. You know, it's not about speed limits. It's not about stop signs, more stop signs. It's not about lights, cameras. We'd like our privacy in our neighborhood. We don't need other people coming in here telling us how to run our place where we live. So we'd appreciate if something is done about it. Thank you.
Thank you. I made Dave a native after 20 or 25 years in the South County, so, but I do appreciate that. And again, Dave is here, the commander is here because he's in charge of enforcement. So if you have an enforcement-specific question, that would be ideal.
Yeah, my name is Darren. I live on Ronsheimer. At 2 o'clock in the morning, between 2 and 3, Old Redwood Highway becomes the Indianapolis 500 drag strip.
Yes, it does.
They are competing with Sonoma County. They should be sued. They should be suing everybody to say we're competing with them. But we have cars that are out there. I've walked out there. The cars, the speed. If you want to see somebody going 120 on Old Redwood Highway between 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning, they're doing it. And it's routine. It's not sometimes. It's 3 to 4 times a week. And it wouldn't take much just to sit there. It's like free money.
Thank you. Dave, how about maybe just let people know how the patrols work in the South County? Who's out, how often, and what beats or districts that you guys do?
Sure. So as you can imagine, our resources are limited. We are mainly on the freeway because that's where most of our calls are generated and that's where most of our accidents are happening. That's not to say that the officers don't get off the freeway and patrol this area. I personally have patrolled Penngrove over the years and done my fair share of enforcement here. So I know I've gotten into some weird stuff here, not to go into anything, but as far as people speeding on Old Redwood Highway and people being drunk and doing all kinds of stuff that they shouldn't be. So I hear what you're saying. Like, I'll give you an example. Right now I think I've got 6 to 8 officers on for the entire county. So we're responding as best we can to the needs of everybody. You know, we've got communities all over that we're responsible for. So we do get into Penngrove when we can, especially at night when it's a little slower. and things are moving a little slower. I know, I can tell you for a fact that as a former graveyard sergeant, I was in Penngrove quite a bit. So we do get out here, it's just we're spread really thin right now, as all law enforcement agencies are, and we are responding to the needs of the communities that we serve as best as we possibly can.
Perfect, thank you.
Certainly.
Thank you, Commander.
Sure.
Thank you, Commander. Appreciate that very much, and we'll let you go.
Okay.
Appreciate. We'll circle back and or what do you have? I'm sorry.
Pedestrian in and across. We have a very highly populated elementary school right in town, a growing downtown. Woodward Avenue, we had to have a child hit and in a coma before we got a stop sign, and people go through that stop sign every day. A lot of people at that meeting requested more presence from CHP. I understand that your resources are limited, but it's desperately needed.
Certainly.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Let me just say this as well, because I know this is true of the CHP. If you notice their cars, on the back of the cars, every car has a big "We're hiring" sticker. For the last so many years, it's tough to be in law enforcement, right? The county, we're suffering the same way. We don't have overall in the state of California, the number of young people that were going into law enforcement dropped by half. By half. The market's not there. We, right now in the county, we put out $25,000 to sign up to become a sheriff deputy because we have such a recruitment piece going on. So the resources, that's a real deal. And it's not just the not paying for them in the budget, it's not having the people out there to actually patrol. So very much appreciate our relationship that we do have with the CHP here. And I can tell you that that speed trailer, and there are 3 in the county, and unfortunately, I think right now, 2 of them have been vandalized and are in repair because that's what happens to them out on the streets. But I know that you've seen the speed trailer here in Petaluma or in Penngrove, probably, I will say, more often than in other locales in the county. We constantly try to get that out here. The CHP knows where they are. They do enhanced enforcement because of that, and we appreciate that as well. So thank you for the diversion there. That was a quick one just to let the commander get in. So we're going to start off really talking about AB 43, the 85th percentile, what's changed, what hasn't changed. And for those of you, you'll get a better explanation. That's how, we don't set the speed limits ourselves at the local level. They're set through a process that the state defines. That's also true, by the way, of different traffic calming measures like stop signs and signals even. Warrants have to be made in order to install those. You can't just put them anywhere you think you want without actually making the findings going forward. So we'll talk about that. We're also going to talk about, certainly we have our Penngrove area traffic study authors from GHD. And with us tonight, we have Senior Project Manager and Transportation Planner Colin Burgett. Did I say that right? And Frank Penry. Frank is a native. You are a native of the South County, so I appreciate that. A Senior Traffic Project Manager. Thanks for being here to both of you. Again, we welcome Dave Hoff. I also want to welcome Fire Chief Jeff Valaquette, who's here from Rancho. Another great partner. Thank you, Chief. Always appreciate you being here. Want to real quickly thank Alan on the camera here, the Visual Story Media, providing video and audio. Just so you know, we have Matt Brown, Sonoma County Communications Specialist, is here to assist us, as well as Andrea Kraut, a true Penngrove native, and Tina Thomas from my office. We have refreshments in the back, which we purchased from Java Moore, so please help yourself there. And next slide, Andrea. Just real quickly, so you remember, a quick reminder that interpretation is available online through the webinar. We also have devices in the back, if anyone needs those. The county's making a real concerted effort to make sure that we have accessible meetings for all. The recording of tonight's town hall will be posted on my county webpage. For anyone joining us virtually, We want to hear from you as well, so please submit your comments to District 2 at sonoma-county.org. That's the word district, DISTRICT, the number 2, at sonoma-county.org. We'll do our best to address all the questions and share all the comments received with GHD to include in the study from this evening's meeting. Next one, Andrea. I want to give you just a real quick update on a couple of things happening that you might find of interest in and around town. Real quickly, the Adobe Road intersection. Andrew, you want to zoom in on that? Some of you know that this project came about after a meeting with the community, talking to the school, the CHP, our own TPW on how we can address some safety issues identified at the intersection. The proposed work includes a northbound left turn lane from Main Street to Adobe Road and a westbound right turn lane from Adobe to Petaluma Hill Road. If you've noticed, vegetation was already cut back to improve sight lines. The pedestrian walk on the far side of the intersection was behind where the trees started, so a car making a right turn couldn't always see who was in the crosswalk. So we took care of that right away. Very grateful to the crews. The bulk of the work is currently in the preliminary engineering and environmental phases. Unfortunately, there is a bit of a waterway right at that corner that has to be dealt with, and construction is scheduled in 2024. The Main Street hillside repair, something new. With this year of heavy rain, you saw some soil wash down the hillside on the 9500 block, I think it is, of Main Street. County maintenance crews will start cutting and removing some dangerous trees that are later this month, and work will begin to repair the slide and stabilize the hillside. Large boulders will be placed on the hill in June with the hope that all work wraps up in time for the 4th of July parade. Penngrove banners. We've been working with the Penngrove Business Merchants Group on ways to beautify Penngrove. Not that it needs it, but one project my office will be funding are Welcome to Penngrove banners. They'll be placed on the light poles throughout downtown. The group is also we're working to have those in place sometime this summer as well. The smart bike and pedestrian path. That bike and pedestrian path, it's about a $13 million project, goes from South Point Boulevard in Petaluma to Main Street right here in Penngrove, is well into design. It is fully funded, and look for construction to begin this time next year, spring of 2024. The next segment will be from Main Street to Railroad Avenue. As we sit here today, that segment has not secured funding, but that'll be coming in the near future. Rule 20A. Rule 20A is a CPUC PG&E / arrangement, and I'll get into it in a sec here. Several weeks back, I recommended Penngrove to be considered for undergrounding all the utilities throughout downtown. Rule 20A are PG&E funds set aside by the California Public Utilities Commission for this purpose. This is a long process, as you can imagine, with PG&E state officials, but Penngrove is on the list. There are some funds already allocated. Johannes Hovertz, the Director of Public Infrastructure, actually, we used some PG&E settlement dollars to buy credits from Yolo County on 50 cents on the dollar. So we have additional undergrounding happening in Sonoma County because of that, and that was a good investment, and we're very happy to be going in that direction. Next. Is that the out front here? Well, if you go right out the door, you'll see where the hole in the near the sidewalk is. That's what we're talking about. We've been working with the social fireman, Bob, about coming up with a solution to make sure that that's safe. I know late at night, coming out of the club, if you walk out that way, if you don't watch where you're going, there is a curb, there's a depression with a drainage, then there's another asphalt curb before you get to the street. Not quite the ideal scenario, so we're looking for ways to clean all that up and make sure that it's safe for pedestrians. So that's also in the works. So that's what the Woodward is. Right now it is out here, yeah. We'll take questions. I want to get through this because we have a lot of, and we're actually going to have the experts instead of the politician talking. But I do think that there's some good updates that I always get asked about, so I want to make sure that you know about them. Lehigh Creek, the maintenance project that's happening this summer. Let you know there's going to be 2 phases of work to be performed within the creek. The first is removal of fallen vegetation or debris that is blocking flow within the channel. A lot of trees moved around with the flows this last winter. This work is very site-specific and will occur in July or so. The second phase is sediment removal, which has happened here before under my watch, and this will occur from the post office parking lot downstream through the park. It really about the bend in the creek, that the box culvert under Main Street, that's sometimes an obstruction, catches a lot of sediment, needs to be cleaned out on occasion. We're going to do that. That work will start later in the summer or even early fall, because they always want to wait for it to be as dry as possible to get into the creek bed. So that's happening. Some ongoing support items committed to help the Penngrove Business Merchants Group that is forming. We've connected them to Sonoma County Economic Development Board, Creative Sonoma. We'll continue to sponsor and waive county fees for community events, I think about $40,000 to date. We're working with Bob here, again, on the sidewalk out front. That's where I had the sidewalk in my spiel. From the restored banner on the stage behind and the removal of the railroad crossing median on Main Street, I think my office continues to advocate for Penngrove as much as possible. Pavement. Andrew, you want to show the map? This is something I'm really proud of within the county. I'm proud of how far the county has come in paving our roads, quite honestly. I worked hard to make pavement a county priority, and in the 10 years, our pavement condition index has improved by 8 points. When most jurisdictions are going in the opposite direction, we are spending today more than 500% of our discretionary dollars on roads than we were in my first year of office. So we are paving roads. You can see on the map here, all roads in purple have been paved within the last 10 years. The blue roads, that's Cypress, Minnesota, Penngrove Avenue, and Hatchery, are scheduled to be paved this summer or next. I've also asked that the entire stretch of Palm Avenue, which is not shown here, Goodwin Avenue, and Woodward be added to the list for future work, probably in 2025. Janice Thompson, who's here, we do a 2-year paving cycle, and we try to make it flexible and get the best deal we can based upon the treatment that we're using. And so it's really getting the biggest bang for the buck, but we slide roads in there as we can to make sure that we can move forward. So appreciate that. And next slide, Andrea. Going in the wrong direction. Real quickly, oh, I'm sorry, Penngrove Sanitation Zone, just a few things. Just wrapped up a comprehensive, you might have seen this out there, they did a comprehensive video inspection throughout the system of all the pipes located within 1,000 feet of Lehigh Creek. Part of that work is required by the Petaluma River TMDL, which stands for Total Maximum Daily Load. That's a study on pathogens that's underway. The Penngrove Lift Station Flood Control or Flood Protection Project, some work has been completed on the force main. I can tell you, Senator Padilla has included this as a potential $2 million earmark, and if you want to write a letter of support to Senator Padilla about that particular project, let him know so that we can make sure that that rises to the top of his desk and we can get that. Look for smoke testing during the fall of 2023 through the fall of next year, I think off and on. This is part of a comprehensive inflow and infiltration, or I&I, investigation project. There are a couple of other special projects within the zone, the smart covers, an investigation piece, a lot of good work happening there, much of it associated with reducing I&I, the flood hazard protection, and providing upgrades throughout the system. And real quickly, to get to the traffic study itself. So in our last town hall meeting, you told me that traffic was a major concern, congestion, speed, safety, and quite honestly, there were a lot of opinions on how we solve these issues, and honestly, not always a lot of consensus. That's what brought us here. We needed some professional help to analyze the problem and ultimately suggest some solutions, especially knowing resources are stretched. We need to be strategic, in my opinion. We need to be sure that we prioritize the projects that will give us the biggest bang for the buck. In August of last year, I worked with my colleagues to commission a traffic study for the Penngrove area to help us achieve this goal. We're all in very interesting times right now, I think, as the world is evolving and changing. We've been a slow growth community for 20 years. The newspaper this morning dictated a lot of that in the housing crisis that we're in. For as much as they're building now in Roanoke Park, They didn't build anything for 16 years. They didn't even build a single-family residence in 16 years in Roanoke Park, but now, of course, they're building a lot. There is new growth all on the Petaluma Hill corridor, we know that, and there will be more growth as the county as a whole, again, struggles to meet the state-mandated housing numbers. Andrea, do you have a slide on the RHNA numbers? If you've heard about the RHNA numbers, these are they. They've increased exponentially for Sonoma County and California. The governor has really been pushing housing and making sure that every city and jurisdiction and county is responsible for certain levels of housing production. And so this is really what we're looking at. And these are 8-year cycles. So we are in the 6th cycle that will go till 2031. And this is what is expected from every individual city. So housing is a big deal and it's mandated, and as you know from Sacramento, if you don't achieve either your housing element or meeting your RHNA numbers, you lose other funding sources, including transportation dollars and other housing dollars. So there is a push for growth in that sense. So I just want to make sure that you're aware of that. Real quickly, the mitigation program that's in place. As many of you know, Roanoke Park has contributed to a regional traffic mitigation fund through the Sonoma County Transportation Authority, and through September 22, have contributed $3,360,000 to the fund, $3.36 million. The total, when all those developments in Roanoke Park are built out, will be about $7 million. The build-out is years away, to be honest. To date, $5.75 million is programmed over the next 4 years, including some projects that we have spoken about before, such as the traffic signal projects at Old Redwood and Railroad in Ely, respectively. This study, a small percentage of the Smart Pathway, Main Street and Adobe improvements, and the corridor study for Railroad in anticipation of an expanded freeway interchange at some point in the future. That $5.75 million in mitigation fees has been leveraged, which is the great thing about having sources of funds like this, to about $22.5 million for those projects. And that's the way you get projects built. You have to blend the funds. Certain funds have certain restrictions, and you want to make sure that you have funds that meet the criteria, but you want to pull from different sources to be able to get the projects built going forward. So just wanted to give you a quick update on that. And my last slide before I head off. Really talking about the speed monitors again. Some of this I already jumped on when the commander was here. The speed trailers have been out. They do work momentarily. It's a shot in time. Some people slow down when they see how fast they're going. Others don't. And I know our experts will talk more specifically about the human nature and how fast people drive and how wide the road is and traffic and so on and so forth. With that, I want to introduce and bring forward Janice Thompson. Janice is our Deputy Director. There she is. She's our Deputy Director of Engineering and Maintenance. Now it's called Sonoma Public Infrastructure, or Sonoma PI. We used to be TPW, then we combined General Services and conglomerated those things. But Janice is here to talk briefly about what was mentioned earlier, which is how we set speed limits and how we set warrants going forward. Janice? We'll come back. We have lots of time for public comment if we get through.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Again, I'm Janice Thompson. I'm the Deputy Director of Engineering and Maintenance at Sonoma County Public Infrastructure. We used to be called Transportation and Public Works. So I'm going to talk tonight about setting speed limits and then the new AB 43. So we are bound by state law, which governs how we set speed limits. And the original purpose of that law was to prevent officials from falsely setting speed limits or creating speed traps. So that's kind of historically how state law came into be. And the way speed limits are set is through an engineering traffic study. And that's where we come out and we monitor the regular flow of traffic. So we observe traffic flowing under the existing conditions. The speeds are noted and the volume and the speed. And we look at those numbers and we take the 85th percentile of that measured speed, and that becomes how the speed limit is set. So again, we're not doing that. We're governed by state law. So this new AB 43, which stands for Assembly Bill 43, that's a modification of the existing law. And it has some advantages, but again, we're governed by the state law. So a couple of changes that AB 43 is making, it is allowing us, if we study an area and we find that the speeds that are traveled in that area are actually higher than the current speed limit, we are now allowed to retain the existing speed limit. Before this law, we would have to change the speed limit based on what the average driver was doing, but that's not true. We could keep the existing speed limit. So that was a major change. Additionally, it allowed for a couple of reductions. So there's 3 potential reductions that are possible. One is a safety corridor, and we are limited. There's rules for what governs a safety corridor and how many a county can set. We have a 20% maximum. That's one of them. Surrounding land use is another criteria for a potential reduction in speed limit. And finally, a business district can govern the lowering of a speed limit. All of these 3 potential reductions have very strict definitions in the law, and we would have to investigate each case individually. So really, that's what I had prepared to talk to you about regarding speed limits and AB 43. And I'll look and see if you want questions now or questions later.
Let's do it right afterwards, because I want to make sure that we get our experts up.
Okay,
I think
great.
all the questions will. Thank you, Janice.
Great, thank you.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that, because I know there's been a lot of talk about what AB 43 allows and doesn't allow. And I can tell you that Janice's shop, the state passes, they pass legislation, just like at the federal level, right? They pass a law, has an intent, and then it goes into what they call rulemaking at the federal level, or here at the local level, state. It still goes through a process of how do you implement this in reality. Johannes Hoverts has been on the statewide committee in interpreting and how you actually apply AB 43. So that comes from some learned opinions. I was looking for a sheet that I was going to tell you as an example of the history of speed limits on Old Redwood that we just talked about today. It was interesting. Did a little research. And 1961, I think, was the year that most of the speed limits were originally set, or set for the first time, or the record of them was set for the first time. And the speed limit was 50 miles per hour. And then in 1977, there was a series of attempts to reduce. Most of them worked for segments, not all of them. And that goes to the 85th percentile that was totally in effect at that time. And I can't find my piece to tell you, but I know it goes from Petaluma city limits to Hatchery. And that was reduced from 50 to 40. And in 2016 or 15, it had to be recertified, and it was. So that is 40 miles an hour and has been since it was reduced in 77. The next segment was, if I remember right, Hatchery to a little north of Old Adobe. That was 50. Do you have that sheet? It's buried in my paperwork somewhere. It was and is 50. You're right. It failed recertification. The radar, it went down to 40 miles an hour in 1977. And then it went in 2015, it failed recertification, which meant they went out, they did the count, they found that I'm paraphrasing, but more than 85% of the cars were traveling at that higher speed. It had to be reset. Now again, the good thing about AB 43 is if it was set under that, you wouldn't necessarily have to adjust it. So that's one good thing about that, but that's what happened there. The next one is north of Old Adobe to north of Redwood Avenue. It's currently 50 miles an hour. That was from 1961 again. It went to 45 miles in 77. And it went back up when they did the next one to 50 miles an hour at the next certification. And then the last one's north of Redwood to Cotati city limits. It was 50, it went to 40, it has stayed at 40. So each of those segments is analyzed, going through the process, and it's set accordingly. So I just thought that was interesting to kind of go back and have a little bit of history about how those things came to be, why. And again, I get this a lot, and I think I've talked to this group before. Many times, communities want to lower a speed limit in their neighborhood. We do the speed study. I tell them, I warn you, it may go up. And I think for a while there, it went up more often than it went down. And again, it was the speed of the drivers, the pavement conditions. So you have to be really careful about when you do a speed study. You do it before you pave a road, while there's still some potholes and speed bumps to slow people down. But that's the way that works at the state level. We look forward to taking advantage of AB 43 as we can. And I'm sure in the future there might even be more adjustments therein. I'm going to get out of the way, and I'm going to and I know that people have lots of questions, but I feel like some of the questions we had earlier are going to all come together, and we're going to talk a little bit further and make sure that you get your comments in. But I want to hand it over to our experts who are going to give a brief presentation, and then I think we're going to have plenty of time to take your comments and questions going forward. We may not have all the answers tonight. We don't have any projects proposed or anything like that, but we can talk about impacts and kind of the theory behind traffic planning. So with that, Frank and Colin, I'm going to turn it over to you.
So my name is Colin Brigette. I'm with GHD, a consulting firm. I've been doing transportation planning work for about 25 years, including work going back to about the 2004 or so Petaluma General Plan update, different projects in Cotati and Santa Rosa and Windsor and so forth. But then my experience is nothing compared to Frank's, who grew up here, and he'll talk a little bit about his experience.
Yeah, good evening. Frank Penry. I'm a technical director with GHD. As Supervisor Rabbit had indicated, I am a sixth-generation Petaluma, born and raised. And along with that, I actually had the opportunity to not only work with the city of Petaluma on a number of projects and even here into Penngrove, but I was actually the city traffic engineer for a number of years, actually when Supervisor Rabbit was on the city council at that time. So my roots in this area are very deep. I often refer to Penngrove as Penngrove, and I have a little slide to that later. But with that, we're going to try and go as briefly as possible to get to your questions. I mean, this is really just an overview on our part, provide you where we are, what we've established so far is our understanding of the situation, ultimately the problem statement, but that's more for you to hear as well, or to provide.
So this slide shows the study area boundaries. The traffic study focuses on a core study area that includes Penngrove, extends north to Cotati Avenue, and then southeast to Corona. And then there's a sort of an extended study area with a green line that goes north along Snyder Lane in the eastern part of Rohnert Park, and then extends along Adobe all the way to Freitas. And so the goal is to identify improvements to benefit Penngrove and respond to a lot of the community concerns we've heard. Next slide, please. And so some of the goals including finding solutions that respond to the community concerns. There's been a lot of great input so far. People have talked about safety and school traffic and choke points and so forth. The study wants to encourage as much community input as possible. And ultimately, we want to recommend physical improvements that can be viably implemented, taking into account funding constraints. Next slide, please. And as part of the public input, we have a website, penngrovetraffic.com. There is an interactive map there that provides a way for people to offer site-specific comments and site-specific suggestions. We got a lot of great comments. And then there's also a way to just submit a general comment there as well. And so this initial comment period is going to close on May 29th. Next slide, please. So we've already heard about a lot of the key issues. Travel speeds are a key issue, safety and collision concerns, regional pass-through traffic, peak hour congestion at choke points that include the key Penngrove intersections. A key factor, as I'm sure many people are familiar with, the major roads in this area were originally designed as rural highways, and one comment somebody mentioned to me just tonight was these roads haven't really changed in 38 years, and so that explains one reason why the speed surveys have been so constant. You know, speed is essentially a function of the roadway design. And then a lack of sidewalks on most segments. Next slide, please. So with travel speeds, ultimately, traffic engineers have a term that's used a lot, refers to design speed. So Old Redwood Highway was designed originally, way back when, even before 38 years ago, designed to accommodate high speeds. And so motorists tend to wind up driving at the speed of roadways designed. So 50 miles an hour is not surprising given the design. And then another factor on Old Redwood is, you know, from North McDowell into Cotati, it's almost 4 miles where there's only one signal. So there's, you know, people don't have a lot of reasons to slow down. Next slide. So we've heard a lot about safety and collision concerns. We sort of looked at collision data and so forth. There was a related county study that looked at safety countywide, and they identified the 3 intersections with the highest collision rates, and 2 of the 3 are in this area, Old Redwood Highway and Railroad, and then Adobe and Freitas. Might be kind of hard to see here, but some of the higher density of collisions tend to be in your commercial districts, which includes downtown Penngrove and other areas. Next slide. This map shows bikeway facilities, which are, you know, there's bike lanes on some street segments. There's a great path in the works. You know, one initial thought we had about treatment options is that upgrading bikeways could ultimately provide a way to sort of leverage some improvements that would be potentially eligible for funding. There's a lot of great funding for bikeway facilities. So this image here shows an example of a bikeway treatment that would also help to slow traffic and is relatively affordable, a low-cost improvement. So it could potentially reduce speeds by you know, just narrowing the roadway while also providing accommodations for other modes. Next slide. Similarly with pedestrian paths, of course, there's very limited sidewalks outside of central Penngrove and some other areas. You know, one possibility is look at improvement options to provide crossings that could include, just as one example, what's called a pedestrian hybrid beacon, which is a signal for pedestrians only. So you're actually creating some intersections with signals for pedestrians to cross so that when we talk about that 4-mile corridor that today only has one signal, you could have a few more signal locations. And this is much more low cost than a full intersection signal. Next slide. Traffic volumes, you know, there's roughly, looking at the traffic counts, there's roughly 35,000 cars a day that either pass through Penngrove or come into Penngrove. And roughly 70% of that is just passing through, the regional pass-through traffic. And of course, you're all familiar with the peak hour choke points. I mean, so for example, central Penngrove is located at those intersections. They're the biggest choke points. A general note is we looked also back at traffic counts from 2007 and 2019, 2022, and it was interesting that the highest volumes were actually 2007. 2019 volumes, right before the pandemic, were similar to 2007, but a little bit lower. And then the most recent counts in 2022 dropped about 8 to 10% because of the pandemic. People aren't traveling as much. Well, so here's the funny thing. Rohnert Park's population was 42,000 in the year 2000, and in 2020 it's 44,000. So it's gained 2,000 residents. So that's about 100 residents a year. So there hasn't been as much growth. They've kind of stalled. A lot of the projects haven't happened yet. Like Somo Village was approved at least twice, maybe 3 times. But you know, they've had 2 different approvals for the Somo Village, but it hasn't happened yet. And so there's other developments like that. It's been development's been kind of flat for the last 2 decades in Roanoke Park. Before that, in the 80s and 90s, there was a lot of growth. Next slide. So the county general plan back in 2008 adopted a set of planned improvements, and they were contingent on more growth occurring in the region. So, for example, they were contingent on growth occurring in Roanoke Park that would pay into funding these improvements. And so that's one reason why there hasn't been changes to the roadway network, is that development didn't occur. Since regional growth slowed. But what was designated in the general plan were plans to widen Railroad Avenue and provide a southbound on-ramp to 101 as a way to divert traffic off of Petaluma Hill Road. The plan was to install traffic calming on Petaluma Hill Road south of Railroad, and also install traffic calming on Adobe. So the idea was that would help reduce the cut-through traffic through Penngrove. And then the other part of the long-term plan, which I think has just always been the long-term plan, was to widen Old Redwood Highway to 2 lanes in each direction. So this hasn't happened, but it's still in the county plan, but it's always going to be 20 years out or 40 years out. And so, well, exactly. And so I think ideally this study will identify short-term improvements that can be funded, that are feasible, lower cost, and aren't contingent on development in Roanoke Park.
We don't want to change the way the roads are around our community. We want to change the way people, we have lack of sidewalks, we have lack of respect for those drivers that come in from other neighborhoods and that's for us, and we have to drive through. That's what we want to change. Stop the people from coming in, don't stop us from doing what we're doing. We're going to do our life.
Appreciate the passion. Appreciate the passion, but let's let the presentation conclude. You will have an opportunity. You've already had 2 now, so you will have more. You could run as well. Let's make sure we can get through the presentation and then we can ask questions afterwards.
So one of the things I'd like to add here is these long-term plans, and as they're developed. So one of the things to point out is, as these plans are developed, the situation is vastly different over time, right? So we look back to the earlier portions of the general plan that had come up with these ideas. This is when actually growth in Sonoma County was assumed prior to the economic downturn of 2008, 7, 8, 9. So that line was actually assumed that with the growth and everything was going up very dramatically. And so it's with that optic that these improvements were developed. Once the economic downturn occurred, growth went down and changed. And that's why we saw those traffic volumes coming up with the 2007. That's kind of that midpoint between the economic downturn and then also where we are now in the 2019, the pandemic, and that again has seen another big change in how we view traffic. As traffic professionals, it's changing things. There's the way the traffic volumes kind of migrate because people are working from home. There's a long portion there where people all worked from home. And now we have this hybrid situation where many of us are working maybe 1 or 2 days wherever we work. Some of us have even changed our lifestyles completely around the pandemic. And so those are other things that we're actually making observations of now that are not completely representative of the way the plans were developed all along. I mean, things change. And so with that, we hopefully is change your optic on it as well and kind of travel with us through the whole process. Because at one point, we're thinking that growth in housing is going up like this, and Sonoma County is just going to be packed full of homes. Well, that didn't happen, and things leveled out, and even actually, as was indicated, kind of went down. Well, it didn't happen when it was intended to happen. So what I'm saying is that the optic changes, the traffic volumes change, things change along the way, and so when we come up, those sets of improvements were always kind of envisioned with certain types of development and where it was occurring and how it was occurring. And we've had 2 fairly substantial changes to the way people travel, more or less, right? Pandemic and the economic downturn. People's job centers changed, pandemic changed things as well. So I'm just trying to put it in a little bit of context of how we're looking at it and how potentially you can help us see how you're seeing it as well. So I just step in on that one. Okay, please. Next slide, next slide.
And so for next steps, so as I mentioned, there's a website. We're going to post a survey in about a week. And so we'd like you all to go to that website and submit your responses to the survey. And that survey will close on May 29th. So that'll be part of the outreach process. And then we're going to have a draft study with recommendations. And then there's going to be another workshop in the fall to talk about what those recommendations are.
All right. Maybe if I could just allow me to start off and just ask you too. So how do you rectify, or how do you recommend going forward when you have issues of safety, congestion, and speed all together? What types of projects elevate because of those, and how do you determine the best location with that?
Well, from a funding perspective, projects that are focusing on safety will be most likely to be able to be funded by outside funding sources. So I'd recommend that as an initial starting point, and you can perhaps, as part of that safety improvement, fold some of your congestion strategies in as well.
Anything on that, Frank? All right. With that, I'm gonna hold the microphone. I'm gonna take questions from you. If you raise your hand, and if you're patient, we'll make sure we stay here for as long as it takes to get everyone's questions. And if you keep it to a question or comment within a brief period of time, that would be great. Tonight, we're taking the input. These gentlemen are going to go back to the office, whether it's remote or in person, I'm not sure. But they're going to actually then put together the information that they heard tonight. They're going to take the data that they know exists within the area, looking forward, and they're going to come up with a traffic plan that then we're going to work on implementation going forward post-fall. And just to add on what Frank said, you know, I'm on a lot of regional agencies. I can tell you I'm on the Golden Gate Bridge, right? The Golden Gate Bridge AM, PM peak traffic is down 30%, has never recovered from the pandemic. Daytime traffic is up, which is interesting, and it's probably the same thing here. So commute patterns have changed. People are not going out in the morning, but people are driving probably locally midday. So you're seeing traffic patterns in different ways, and I think that we're going to see that for the upcoming so many years, perhaps, until things settle out. So with that, I'm going to wander around.
Yeah, when you talk about long-term, I mean, you look around the room here, long-term, there's not going to be a lot of these folks still here. Bless the little children who are. But we had a study in about 2003. The problem has not changed. It's only gotten worse. Nothing's been done to address the problems that already existed. When these roads were designed for what we call so-called high speed was 50 miles an hour. Today, high speed is 70. And at night, it's 120. Okay? So your premise for your study, that's going to take another 20 years for anything major to happen, is going to be after most of us aren't even here anymore. We are incentivizing the very problem we're trying to fix. When 85% of the people drive and they speed, we're rewarding them with a higher speed limit. A lower speed limit does something.
I totally agree with you on the speed limit. And I'm not making excuses, but so the reason the state has that historically is to avoid speed traps by local jurisdictions. Well, it's against the state law, and don't ask me because I can't change it. Hey, let's have a decent civil meeting. I know that you guys can do that. Don't shout out. I'm coming around with a microphone.
Hi. Is there any chance that the area that we're talking about in the Penngrove district, any talk about any high-density housing that has not been talked about, zoning changes?
There are a few parcels. The part of our RENA, I will admit, part of the RENA situation for the county, our county is unique in that we have urban growth boundaries, we have green belts, we tax ourselves for the open space, it's all great. you drive from one jurisdiction to the other, yet the county's RHNA numbers, or those regional housing needs assessment numbers, went up by 650%. And we've been doing a lot for housing post 2017, the wildfires. We relaxed a lot of our building codes to allow people to be trailers on property, tiny homes, you name it. I think we've done a lot of that and been very flexible. A single-family parcel can have up to 3 units by law with an ADU, what they call a accessory dwelling unit, a junior accessory dwelling unit, and then the resident itself. But you do have to find the properties to show the state that you can meet your RHNA numbers. And they have to occur, but they have to occur within areas in our county that have water and sewer. Penngrove has sewer, so there is one, I believe, here in the Penngrove area.
Where the SMART train was supposed to be the new station. Right. Anything around there going to be now?
Well, in Petaluma it's supposed to be, but they've had a hard time approving projects, to be honest. Yeah, it's proposed. And that was the idea with the SMART train, was to keep people, the high density on the corridor, so that people could use SMART train to get to and fro. Appreciate that.
Hi, I'm a resident off Kyler's Court, and I'm also a teacher at Penngrove School. I have 2 15-year-old twins, and we live like 30 seconds from the school. My children could never walk to school safely. He gets dropped off on the bus. He can't even go through the crosswalk. So that's part of our problem. But I also want to ask, we came to one of these meetings and you talked about some traffic signals going by Palace of Fruit and also off of Railroad Avenue. What's the status of those traffic signals?
Janice, you want to tell us?
Yep, I'm happy to say they're a work in progress. We just secured funding for new traffic signals at Old Redwood Highway, at Railroad Avenue, and Old Redwood Highway at Eli. So we're just underway.
So there is something being done, and that'll be 3 traffic signals in an area that only had 1 before, as Colin mentioned, in that stretch, that 4-mile stretch from the freeway up to the hatchery. I'm going to go in the back so we...
And those are scheduled to be worked on in the 2027 timeframe.
Who's had her hand up? There you go. Sorry.
Thanks, everybody.
You have a lot of advocates here.
I feel their pain. So I had a couple comments, but one of the things on the speed limits that we have today, what happens after somebody dies on Old Redwood Highway? We've had a lot of deaths in the vicinity, and it doesn't feel like the county is doing investigations to look at how that street could be made safer and evaluate the speed limits in the context of fatalities and accidents. That's real losses. I mean, I know people here who have lost very dear people to them. And in fact, there was the one individual who used to ride his horse, and he was killed by a motorcyclist. He and his horse were both killed by a motorcyclist. So I don't hear the connection to the community in that sense when we're talking about speed limits and planning.
Janice?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Let me tell you what we do. With every traffic accident, if a CHP or sheriff is responding, they prepare a traffic report. We get a copy of those reports and we review them. Under our review, we're looking for any engineering controls that may or may not have been present to prevent such an accident. I will tell you, over 90% of our accident reviews are based on impaired driving, and there's no engineering controls, no engineering problems in the roadways.
Hold on one second.
Yeah, there's 4 incidents at least that had nothing to do with impaired driving. So, I mean, I think we need to look closely at the record around Penngrove. And I know Penngrove would feel much more comfortable if we had the county advocating for us like the city of Cotati does for their community to get that 35-mile-an-hour speed limit from let's just say Twin Oaks up to Railroad Avenue. I mean, that's an area where we need to be able to let people turn left off of Adobe onto Old Redwood Highway to decongest the school area on Adobe Road. And we need to slow people down coming into the community. And the other thing is, this is the second point, Roanoke Park needs to work with us or the county to facilitate traffic down their east-west corridors by light timing, so people are not as incentivized to come straight down Petaluma Hill Road. Let these people get to 101, and only the value-added traffic coming through Penngrove would come through Penngrove then. And a lot of it comes down to the GPS in somebody's phone or car. If you slow them down just a little bit, a couple minutes coming through Penngrove, their cars are going to tell them, and their phones are going to tell them, hey, it's quicker to get on 101, right? Whether 101's built out or not. So those are my points. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Longtime Penngrove resident, Steve Miller. I just have a question, a comment, and a request. The question is, I want your personal opinion, sir, of how we would stand in a CEQA lawsuit to halt all this development until we can iron out some of the problems.
I am an architect and not an attorney, but from what my experience tells me, and I don't think we would stand very well. There's mitigation measures in place. Part of the problem, I'll be honest, right? Janice, you tell me if I'm wrong. Traffic issues, it goes back to Prop 13 because we never had development impact fees until Prop 13 came on the books. Then there was a hole in jurisdictions' budgets, especially for new development. It used to be that if you built a house, you got the property tax from it, you would actually make money as a jurisdiction. Petaluma builds a house, they lose money in the city. County, probably the same thing. So what they do is they charge traffic impact fees, park impact fees, fire, civic impact fees, school impact fees, and by the time you're done, it leads to kind of the rolling housing issues. And the other part about that, most of those, you can't collect the dollars until certain places on the construction. In a development, you could have development agreements, Steve, that you can get the money up front, but most of the times you're getting it at the back end when the problem is already existing, and then it takes you years to plan and go forward to fix the problem that they're causing. Quite honestly, though, they're buying into the infrastructure that we all own. They're paying for their fair share of that, and that's how development impact fees are calculated. A lot of us haven't necessarily paid that fair share in that same manner, especially if you own a home for a longer period of time or didn't build it yourself. So it's an interesting conundrum in California. Sir?
I went to the website and it was really good. Thank you. The consultants are doing a great job. I was just wondering, can you post up there? I couldn't find it, the actual scope of work and the deliverables, please. Just
great.
A request.
Thank you, Steve.
And then a comment on the speed limits. It's really hard to do. I've been down that road and the Supervisor Rabbit's telling the truth about that. You can't just arbitrarily put a 35-mile-an-hour speed limit where it was 50 before. It's tough to do, so thank you, sir.
Thank you, appreciate that. We really hope that AB 43 would give us some more avenues, but not enough.
Yeah, hi, thank you, David. I am Greg Fodley. I live in the friendly city of, hi Angie, of Rohnert Park, and so my perspective is maybe a little different. I was helping out with the light parade this last Christmas, and I was sort of directing traffic at the end of where Grove Street hits Old Redwood Highway there. And a lot of people, because the parking was Old Adobe, I'm sorry, yeah. No, actually, no, Grove Street, where it hits Old Redwood Highway there. Yeah, it's Old Redwood Highway. Anyway, people were having to park out on Old Redwood Highway, blocks and blocks down, and they were crossing the street there, and there were no lights, there were no, street lights there. If we could get like a crosswalk and a light right there at where Grove Street is, right, right by Java Moore, there. Pardon me? I'm not. I'm sorry. What? I don't understand.
So you're.
In short, you're advocating for more pedestrian crosswalks around Old Redwood and a light.
Yeah, a light there, I don't know if a lot of people cross across there other times of the year and stuff. One other thing was, my wife commutes to Sonoma and comes down Petaluma Hill Road and goes out Adobe Road. And she asked me to just say that if the vegetation can be kept down low, it's a lot would be a lot easier to see pedestrians and especially kids,
You talking specifically at the intersection, the corners, or along the stretches, or all?
I'm talking about the intersection.
Okay,
Right there.
appreciate that. There's been a lot of vegetation management going on right now. Obviously, the rains bring all the growth, and there's been a lot of work going on out there.
Hi there. I live on Petaluma Hill Road and Dutch Lane, and I think until we had some comments, there hasn't been a lot of discussion about Petaluma Hill Road. And that's where there's been a lot of congestion, and I would say the density of Penngrove is off Petaluma Hill Road through our neighborhood. And one of my comments is the comment on Roanoke Park development, how it's only grown 2,000 people and whatever. Well, you know what? Willow Glen has 500 homes there. Maybe approximately 4 people per home is 2,000 people. So I feel like our neighborhood is receiving the brunt of this population increase from Roanoke Park, even though it's isolated. It seems to be isolated, and they're coming down Petaluma Hill Road. My other comment is the advent of traffic apps, which my neighbor has mentioned before. And the other impact of these traffic apps is that they're sending this traffic through our historic residential country roads like mine on Dutch Lane. So many people turn left coming down Petaluma Hill Road, go on Dutch Lane, careen down Davis to cut over to Adobe, no offense to your wife, to get to Sonoma. And I think it's not anybody's fault, it's just that technology has totally outpaced whatever plans from 1999, 2003, technology has outpaced a lot of things that are happening in real life. And I think these, especially for my community on Dutch Lane and Davis, there's Patrick right there, I think these traffic apps have really impacted how people are driving, especially when it's congested on Petaluma Hill Road and Adobe. And look, I get it. My kids went to Penngrove Elementary, and I live 0.1 miles from but I don't feel comfortable having them walk to school because that short walk between Dutch Lane and Adobe is really dangerous. I mean, it's a community neighborhood. My last comment, I know we're at time, is that, codified in the Penngrove plan, my parcel is identified as an agricultural residential parcel. And we have rules and extra requirements as owners of these properties to maintain the bucolic country nature of our parcels. And it's really hard to do that when people are driving 50 miles an hour down Petaluma Hill Road to get to Adobe Road. I completely appreciate the conversation around Old Adobe, around Stony Brook, all those other roads to the west of us, which, as you mentioned, someone mentioned, were designed to be arterial country roads. I'm not sure Petaluma Hill Road was supposed to do that. My neighbors south of me, their houses are like 10 feet from the road. I'm not sure. I am a new resident. I have not been here for 6 generations, but in the few years I've been here, the traffic has gotten worse, and I don't know how that is possible. But since I came here during COVID, and traffic has come back since COVID, we've seen lots of people careening down Dutch Lane all the time, and I measured it, it's 16 feet across. No one has paved it in I don't know how long, and it's barely wide enough for 2 average-sized SUVs to drive next to each other. And the traffic that's getting blocked up on Adobe and Petaluma Hill Road, all this redirected traffic down these historic country residential roads has got to stop, and we have to have some, maybe at the very least, stop signs. I totally appreciate your comments and the work on these arterial roads in our community, but I think we need to also assess these residential country, historical country roads that are becoming, byways. I think
Oh, I appreciate that very much. Frank, could you talk about two things? Could you talk about Petaluma Hill Road and maybe any potential types of calming on that stretch? And then can you talk about the roads, you know, that are more in and around that, like Dutch and others?
Yeah, I'm actually reminded, I think it was probably, maybe Janice may remember, the speed humps installed. Is it Davis that's got the, not Davis, it is Davis, which was a notorious little, yeah. So, yeah. Well, and a bit of a cutoff to the intersection, the signalized intersection. That's, yeah. So to your Supervisor Rabbit, when we look at arterial roadways, this is where traffic calming becomes a balance, a very delicate balance, because one, your emergency services, your network is the arterial network. And so that's that hierarchy that we have. It goes from an arterial to a collector to sometimes a connector, and then obviously a residential roadway. And so we obviously intend to nurture that hierarchy, but it really is, like I said, a balance, a delicate dance of making sure that we try and accommodate, and actually, I believe it was just the last speaker that talked about the zoning and the fact that you're zoned agricultural, and that intent was to keep those homes away from the roadway initially, and now there are some that are more closely to the roadway. It's actually that context of things being closer to the roadway that actually has one of the bigger impacts to the travel speed along a roadway. When you put curb and gutter along a roadway, it has an impact. When you build homes or have trees that are on the sides of the roadway, those have an impact. They create, without getting visual tunnels and other, we won't go there. They change the viewpoint or the context of the roadway. And those actually are some of the most successful ways. However, in this case, it's a delicate balance. You don't want to encourage development that's right along the edge of the roadway when you're trying to also preserve an agricultural viewpoint and a setting that is appropriate to the residential homes that you have on that. That's that balance that we really have a problem with.
Thanks, Frank. Appreciate that.
We live on, I agree with everything that everybody's saying about Old Redwood Highway and Petaluma Hill Road. What I wanted to just bring up was the side roads that feed those roads. We live on Minnesota, Penngrove, that kind of area, and that is like an obstacle course trying to get down that road with the amount of potholes that there are on that road. That is accessed by a dairy that brings major trucks down that road, and I have been calling the county with all of my neighbors for the last 2 years since the metal fence went up around that corner. Anybody who hasn't been around that corner, there is an opaque fence that was built all the way around the corner. And somebody who has children, who bike with my children, who run with my children around that area, there are no sidewalks. There are too many potholes so people drive in the middle of the road. And now there is an opaque fence around that corner. And our neighbors have been calling and calling, concerned that someone is going to get hit one day and killed. And so I just want to bring that up as an area to please assess.
Appreciate that very much. Kim? I was just going to ask before we go, Janice, we just had this discussion. I know that we have this county has 1,368.95 miles of roads. How many of those roads have sidewalks?
How many of those
miles, or what percentage of our roads have sidewalks?
Yeah, thanks. And we have 88 miles of sidewalk, which represents 6%.
And most of those are within places like Main Street, Occidental.
Exactly. Kenwood, Sonoma, those where towns are kind of centered, but still in the
And it's
county.
pretty consistent that counties don't do sidewalks. Counties don't do lighting unless they do a lighting district, unless you do a lighting district or a district to install sidewalks as well.
Right.
It's just that's how it's been in California. I'm going to go to Kim, and then I'll come back up front.
Thank you. I just wanted to bring something up about one of your intersection improvements that you showed, and that is at the corner of Adobe Road, Main Street, Petaluma Hill, and that it's in the works to have a right-hand turn lane from Adobe onto Petaluma Hill Road. And I'm assuming that is to keep the traffic moving, more so for the people that are coming home, because there's a lot of people that go to Sonoma and beyond that, and then they come home. Most of the traffic that makes that right-hand turn is probably about 80%, I would say. I really don't know, I'm just guessing. But when I'm having to be at the opposite end of the light, trying to go straight on Adobe East, most of those people are turning right, so why they need their own designated right-hand turn, I'm really not sure. I think if you have the space in the road to widen it there, I think that a new lane should be dedicated to the school. The school is what needs to have the school is really where the big problem is here. Yes, downtown Penngrove has a problem, but primarily the school. We have 2 times during the day that it's a factor of safety. And if you've ever had to be at that intersection, you would understand what I mean. So I pick up my grandchildren just 1 time a week, and that's enough to see. I have to stand at the light in order to cross, so what I notice is that people are coming from north to south to pick it up. They are in the lane that is designated to go straight, but they're needing to make a right-hand turn lane to pick up their children. And in doing so, that backs up the traffic on Petaluma Hill. I can't tell you how many times that I have seen people pass them to go over the double yellow line so that they can go straight in the intersection, and then they're in the intersection and they're on the wrong side of the road having to cut over. I think that intersection needs to have an evaluation versus having a right-hand turn lane to have people go home.
Janice, can you talk about the movements on that intersection? Because those have been studied, right?
Yeah, so thank you. We are aware that that exists, and we are in constant communication with the school, and we're always evaluating that intersection to see if there's further improvements we can make. I will say the Main Street at Adobe plans are exactly what the speaker said. They are meant to relieve kind of that bypass, the congestion. I certainly have been through the school area during school hours, and this is a common problem in a lot of our communities. There is that half hour before and after school lets out, and the problems are enormous in all of our communities, and they're really very difficult to solve because that problem exists for a half an hour twice a day.
And I can just tell you that our office was out there. I believe you were there, Janice. I know the CHP was there. Kim, you might have been in that meeting at the school with the principal and the school district. And I know that we had prompted the school district to help us make some changes, and to no avail. So if you could put a little pressure on the school district to also join the fight on solving the traffic congestion at that corner, that would be great.
Thank you. Molly Mazzella again. I think, you mentioned that we're all passionate and there's a lot of tension in this room, and I think for me, I feel like we come with problems, and at every turn we're told, no, things aren't going to change. We can't do it because of this. We can't do it because of that. And I think for me, that's what is really frustrating. 6 years ago, we met in this room to discuss the fancy railroad crossing, and at that time, no offense to you, sir, but it was proposed that we put a light at Woodward and Main. And you said no. You said that's just going to annoy people. This area is just going to become suburbanized, so you just have to get...
I don't think I said it would annoy people. Okay, we're going to have to respectfully disagree on that one. I will just tell you, so if you're frustrated, the reason we're here is to come up with solutions. You already heard tonight we have 2 traffic signals funded and underway. We spent $2 million removing the median strip that the community wanted us to remove by the smart crossings. And, you know, we've made pedestrian improvements there as well. Do we need a light there? We'll ask that question of the experts.
Yeah, I just want to remind us all that there is a railroad there at the intersection of Woodward and Main, and the order of hierarchy is federal, state, and local, and federal rail rules. So. So that's private development that's happening on the corner. And what is your question? So you're saying crossing Main Street from Woodward to the other side?
Okay. That's something that we could take down and talk about,
Right.
and prioritize.
And again, this is all in a rail corridor, and that trumps all of us. So we do have to work and coordinate all of that with rail.
Okay.
Also community safety, and I hate to see some serious injuries happening. So it's something to be aware of.
Thank you. If we can wait for the microphone, please.
A couple of things. Oh, I'm sorry, Karen. A couple of things I wanted to mention is Cotati's been referenced a lot. I think many of us really admire what Cotati's done. They've very effectively disincentivized driving through that town. We've talked about speed on Petaluma Hill Road, or rather Old Redwood Highway. It takes you down 40, then to 35 before you even get near town. And then when you're in town, they've got crosswalks, stop signs everywhere. So many people who want to go to Santa Rosa take Petaluma Hill Road, because it's so much easier than to go through Cotati and jump on the freeway. I also wanted to mention that it's not just Rohnert Park, it's also South Santa Rosa and Bennett Valley, the traffic that we get, again, because going through Cotati is difficult. They very effectively disincentivized that. We all would like, I think many of us would like that model where we get people coming to Penngrove who want to be in Penngrove, not using us as a thoroughfare to go elsewhere. Two other things that I want to say is that I just want to respectfully disagree, David, about consensus in these meetings, because we just had a meeting here on the 16th and we broke up into different groups by neighborhood, and the consensus was very strong about what the problems are and about what we would like to see done. And there's also willingness to work with what we have. I don't think it's been suggested that we have a traffic light at Woodward and Main. That would be great. I also think a three-way stop sign with crosswalks would be a much more affordable option and maybe would be just as effective. Inexpensive things, speed bumps, crosswalks, stop signs would be great. And then lastly, I have a question about one of your slides having to do with, I think it's the area that has cement and rock on the east side of Main Street, that's going to be redone. Is that what you're referring to? When that's done, it would be crazy in my mind not to put a sidewalk in on that side as well, because we have, Penngrove Market has really revitalized our town, and we have the wonderful Penngrove Hub at the other end, and there's no egress between. You can't walk to any of those stores because there's no path, just cars, you're in the street, and now we're gonna have a parking lot there, as my neighbor just mentioned. So it would be a shame to do all of that work and not put in a sidewalk at the same time, just as we just had PG&E tearing up our streets last summer to put in gas, and now we hear they're going to put in the wires. It would have been great if they did it while the streets were open, but.
Well, again, the wires aren't going to happen for years and years, and the road's probably going to be needed to be paved again. When I talked about consensus, I acknowledge that there's angst in the community regarding traffic, safety, and speed. What there is no consensus on, and I'll be honest, and I said this early on, and that's why we have the experts here, is to come up with the solutions. The letter that I got out of that meeting that you had here had 12 stop sign proposals within the community. Janice talked about the warrants that are required to make those. Those all won't reach a warrant criteria. So we need to spend the limited amount of money that we have on projects that are going to make the biggest bang for the buck. That's why I asked, do you prioritize safety, speed, congestion? Totally get the safety piece, and the speed and the congestion will come from that. But you know, that's why we're here. And that's my frustration that's why I wanted you to form a municipal advisory committee. I'll be honest, was to get consensus. We could talk about that later. If we disagree, we'll do it later. We'll talk outside or whatever.
Thanks. I have two comments. Actually, I'm going to stand up, though. One is a couple of people have used the word accident. In my world, we don't use the word accident. We say crashes or collisions, because accident implies that it couldn't have been helped. And as the engineers from GHD said earlier, many of these roads were designed for a speed of 50 miles an hour. And putting up signs doesn't, changing the speed limit and putting up a sign doesn't change behavior in the way that changing the design and designing a road for a lower speed can change behavior. And then part of the sort of congestion and safety interaction, right? We want our kids, right, to be able to walk to school, and we want to be able to walk to the store. And so we have to find ways to make it safer to get people out of their cars, right? We're in a climate emergency. We need less cars on the road. And there's a conundrum in that, right? You get in this cycle of like, okay, I don't feel safe letting my kid walk to school. Well, then that means there's more cars driving all around the school, which makes it less safe. And the fact that inter-district transfers in this county are so easy to get is part of the problem, I think, because more and more children, my Safe Routes to School program does an analysis around the schools of what percentage of the children live within walkable and bikeable distance of the school. And if not a high enough percentage doesn't, we don't actually work with them because we don't, if there's not enough who can. At one point, I live in Cotati on Old Redwood Highway, and at one point in time, of the 25 kids just in my block, none of them went to the local school. They were going to Petaluma, to Sebastopol, to Santa Rosa, to wherever. And that adds to that whole issue around the schools, and I don't know how we deal with that one.
Agree with you.
Hi, I'd like to piggyback on both of those comments there. Starting with, it's been made very obvious to us tonight that we are held hostage by the dictation of the speed limits by the state, not the county. So if we can't do that through the county, complaining about it's not going to help. But what I would like to say about the corridor along Old Redwood Highway, which I've lived along for a long period of time, is if it was a direct means to get to the freeway, as it was originally through Cotati, it is not that now, and hasn't been because of all the mitigations that have already been mentioned and that Cotati has successfully implemented to slow traffic down. Thus, what I'm saying here is we should look at some of the solutions that have been proposed to us, like a safety corridor that extends from Petaluma to Railroad Avenue. That is an actual way we can go to maybe get that road slowed down. Because we can complain about it all we want, there's nobody in this room that can lower that speed limit. Only we can do it through the tools that are available to us now. I share this frustration. I know we are all frustrated. But just getting the frustration out and yelling at everybody here about it is not going to solve the problem. I'm about solutions, and I think everybody else in here wants to see solutions, and they're not going to happen by just getting angry. There's 3 tools that we were given here on that segment alone. There's other issues in this room that have come up that are equally important. We're all going to find different things here that are important to us individually, but as a community, there's only so much we can do with the funds and the time that we have.
Thank you. Hold on one sec. We have people online that also want to participate. And I'm going to read the question from Ashley, and I'm going to get out of the way of the other microphone, or the speaker. Ashley lives on Curtis Drive. Any plans for a left-hand turn lane from Petaluma Hill onto Curtis? Also, can we add a no-through street sign on Curtis? Is that something that we typically do? We'll make a note Do we put no through street signs on dead end roads typically? Okay. Okay. I was told we are paving Minnesota and Penngrove Avenue in the next 2 years, so look for that.
So can we talk more about how we designate this area as a safety corridor?
Good question. Good comment. I appreciate that. Janice, what does so we heard about the limitation countywide, but what criteria do you have to meet within the corridor itself? Is it residential density? Is it traffic accident or what?
Combination of land use and existing conditions, and so we can get definitions out and see if they qualify or what else is needed. It's not something we just create, you know, it has to do with what the surrounding land use is.
We'll definitely do more work on that to make sure that we and analyze the section on both, perhaps Petaluma Hill. Can you do a safety zone on more than one corridor, or is it in a district?
Yeah, we can look at multiple corridors.
Okay.
And then we have to balance it countywide.
And I very much appreciate your comment regarding the tools that are available. And Frank actually went into some of those. You have Old Red and Petaluma Hill, which are both wide, safe roads that are straight and high speed. But by doing some of the pinch downs and taking some of those steps that we can do, even though the road can never be, the speed limit can't be lowered, the driving, Well, I think, you know, to be fair, Cotati's a city, and they have different residential density. If you look where the speed limit is lower, all those backyards, there's houses every 50 feet. So you have to have a certain density of residential development. We looked at that when we were trying to do the speed limit down here by Twin Oaks after the accident. We don't have the residential density that's required to make that finding there. But Cotati does. Cotati also, being a city and not a county, has different rules. Sir?
I have a question for Janice. Regarding the signals on Eli and Railroad, are there going to be cameras for violators that are running those signals? If yes, great. If no, why not?
So we haven't looked into that yet, so I can look into that.
It's a really inexpensive way to collect a lot of revenue, and that'll really slow people down.
And that's an enforcement side of things.
Yeah, that's right. And that is a win-win-win.
Thank you.
Thank you. Rick?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Supervisor. Two things I want to point out that, and I know folks come and go over the years, but in the 38 years here, we got policies, and at some point, we're either going to be accommodating and relieving congestion and moving traffic through here quicker, or we have to reduce the volumes. Once it's here, it's coming through here. And I mean, all the way down the corridor to Freitas Road, all the way, it has to taper off before it comes through here. By the time it gets to Corona Road, it's going to come through here, and then we're faced with things like going wider and wider and wider. Something that we can't do two things simultaneously, number one. Number two, quickly, you all, the Highway Patrol, and Janice mentioned AB 4340. Would you please let us know what the difference is with 773? And lastly, we held a meeting on the 2nd of April with the folks of Davis, Dutch, and Brand Lane and Railroad Avenue. There's a problem that the board visited years ago. It's been identified, and the problem was northbound on Adobe, it was an afternoon problem. Now, of course, with more development coming online on the Hill Road, it's happening in the morning southbound. We need you to revisit it, review it, and do what you can to accommodate not only the old northbound, but the new southbound problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. Appreciate that.
So traffic is just going to get worse, only because the green belt has expired, and all of the development coming from Santa Rosa all the way through here on Railroad, it's going to constantly be a problem. So why are we allowing more building without the infrastructure to relieve it first?
That's a question for our friends in Roanoke. So development in California, you know, in this county, the development should and should occur within the urban growth boundaries of the cities, and that's the development that's occurring in Roanoke Park. One could argue about where those boundaries should be, but that was put to the vote of the people of Roanoke Park, and they decided that in their own free will. Are you saying that, well, again, we're in a conundrum. Our county has lost population for the last 5 years. I'll tell you, my son's a firefighter, his soon-to-be wife is a nurse. They can't live in Sonoma County unless I gave him a down payment. I made the mistake of having 3 kids, and I can't afford 3 houses. So housing is a huge problem, not only here in Sonoma County, but in California and even beyond. And it goes to why the Highway Patrol doesn't have more officers on the street. And it goes to why, our deputies are working mandatory overtime of 36 hours over a month's time, or even more if you're working in the jail. So it's about balancing the housing and the infrastructure. And as I said before, with the way that development impact fees come about and the way the money is allocated, you're usually a little bit playing catch up. And I think that's where we find ourselves now with a lot of what's happening in Roanoke Park. Frank, anything on that? Nope, we're good. Sir?
Thank you, sir. I'm not an engineer and I don't have a lot of money. So I'm used to doing things with little money, not a lot of knowledge. I can fix the school problem with about $50. All you have to do is put a sign out there on the front of the school, no left turn. That'll take it. They come from Roanoke Park and Petaluma, whatever they got to do. They go into the school, they come out of the school, they want to make a left-hand turn, and they only allow 1 car behind them per light. So why don't they just make it no left turn? You get out of the school, if you want, go down Old Redwood Highway. You don't have to go down Petaluma Hill Road. Then the problem with Penngrove. How are you going to run a business in town if customers come in, park in front of your store, and they won't let them out? What they ought to do at Penngrove is to go down Penngrove, make a loop, take care of business, and get out. Penngrove should be a facilitator for traffic for Roanoke Park. We need to take care of our community. We didn't cause the problem, Roanoke Park caused the problem. Thank you, sir.
You're talking about no left turn out of the school? Yes, sir. Which is one of the things that we brought forward to the school district. Okay. All right, Suzanne?
The point supervisor made a very good point. Cotati is a town. They hired an urban planner who helped create the traffic mitigation factors that have been previously cited. Penngrove hired the same urban planner, and her recommendations were dismissed. So I just want to know that there was the same level of expertise, but nobody paid any attention. But I have a fundamental comment. When it all comes down to it, we're talking about a problem with enforcement. And that comes down to the lack of dollars and manpower. And we're coming down, I suspect, that the study, which will document what we all know are the problems, and then the problem will be the dollars to implement the solutions. So my question is, who do we contact at the state or federal, at the higher levels, to help loosen up the dollars that are going to be needed so our CHP has the officers to enforce, and we have the dollars for the infrastructure that, as we're clearly aware, we don't have. So we need to know, how can we lobby?
Thank you, Suzanne. Just to note, the mitigation measures that were presented by the private citizen were not dismissed, but they will be incorporated if she sends them in to our county traffic engineers. This is really about, let's let the experts, design this and the work that they do.
I think it's time for the school to get Petaluma City Schools to run a bus to bring the Roanoke Park students in, because the school has almost 500 students, 40% are coming from Roanoke Park, and they're all coming down and creating a bottleneck and unsafe conditions.
Thank you for that. Janice, just on the question of funding for projects coming forward, I talked about it briefly with the blending of all the different sources, but do you have a little more information that you could share regarding where, once a project is identified, for instance, the traffic signals or some future project, where are we likely to get the dollars to make sure that that gets built?
Yeah, so for the 2 traffic signals that are coming, we were able to secure Measure M money, which going forward is referred to as Go Sonoma, but that's your local tax dollars at work, and we've secured funding for those 2 signals from the Measure M. I will say that the way other state and federal funding is calculated, that it is based on road miles and population, and that's where counties struggle. We have a lot of geography, we have a lot of road miles, but we don't have a lot of population when you compare us with cities. So we don't compete well for traditional state and federal funding.
I'll give you my quick road spiel. So again, in this county, we have 1,368 miles of roads. Just to put that in perspective, Napa County next to us, about 430. Marin County, about 420. Solano County, about 631. And again, we have 1,368 miles of roads. We have a lot of roads. And a lot of it had to do with the way the county was developed, smaller farms. We don't have those huge ranches that some places do, but a lot of smaller farms, and we just have a lot of county roads. That's a single road from here to Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, that we all collectively have to take care of. So that's part of our road dilemma. As Janice said, the gas tax historically, for every dollar you spend in gas tax, the state keeps 56 cents. That goes to the state highway system. The remaining 44 cents gets split in half. 22 cents goes to cities based on per capita, population. So depending on the size of your city, that's what you get. But for the counties, it's based on this formula that Janice mentioned, 75% on population, 25% on road miles. So look at our county with a huge amount of road miles, relatively small in comparison to some places, population. What Orange County gets 16 times as much money per road mile as we do, just from that one funding source. That's why, for a few years at least, until I think maybe we were surpassed by one county, after I instituted that road plan, our county spent more discretionary money on road paving than any other county in California. And that's how we paved 500 miles over the last 10 years. Imagine Marin County, that would have been all their roads and then some. Napa County, all their roads and then some. But for our county, you can still see there's potholes around, and people still rightfully complain. But that's what we're working against, and that's what we're trying to do going forward. The Go Sonoma, the quarter cent, that's great. There's is it 20% to local roads on that? I think it is, 20% of that measure. The good thing about Measure M, that was instituted originally to complete Highway 101. You know, Highway 101 was $1.2 billion from start to finish, and it took 20 years. But it wouldn't have happened if we didn't have our local sales tax measure. So now that Highway 101 is done in Sonoma County, we can take that 45% of that measure and allocate it to other things, which they've done. Still doesn't get us a lot, unfortunately, because of the way that our funding sources are derived at the county, but we're better off now than we were before because we completed that project. And I guess what I'm saying is that you have to blend all these funding sources together. You have to look under the mattress. You have to be patient, and you have to keep plugging away. I'm really happy that we got the funding secured for the 2 traffic signals. That's huge, and that hasn't happened before. And we'll look for those dollars every place we get.
David, I just wanted to ask again if a sidewalk is part of the Hillside project on Main Street.
Not right now, right? It would be, again, as an architect, maybe Frank, I would tell you that if you could imagine digging into the hill another, 5 feet to put a sidewalk in, it would double the cost of that project. It'd probably make it prohibitively expensive, to be honest. Hold on one second.
Hi, I'm Shannon, and I am a parent and a crossing guard at Penngrove Elementary School. So I just wanted to provide a little accuracy on the time frame that it's backed up. It is about 45 minutes in the morning and about 45 minutes. There are multiple release dates or release times of dividing up. We do have a large student body, 481 students. For their safety, which is a priority at our school, is to help with the traffic of these multiple arrival times and release dates. The school needs support from you as a community also to go to the district for support for our traffic and for us to have more crossing guards and these developments to help this issue. And as for the safe routes to school, we can't even promote that at our school because of the traffic issues. We used to put it into our newsletter, and we can't do that because it's the safety of our children. Every life is important, but especially our children who need our judgment as parents and community members to keep them safe.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Yes, for the word community. 100 years ago, everybody in town here would know each other. They would walk to market, they would ride their buggy. It is this lack of visibility, the lack of knowing each other, I think, that leads to people to speed when they get on roads. People raised in two-car suburbia think of roads are to get somewhere else. And I would point out that the north end of Petaluma was deliberately designed with a small shopping center so that everybody could walk to the shopping center, to little stores, coffee shop, restaurant, park. It was designed that way. And I think the best thing we could do to get people to slow down would be if we could get Rohnert Park to design communities, not just two-car suburbia, and get the people on the street there realizing it's neighbors you're speeding by, it's neighbors you're running over. And if you could talk to the political establishment in Rohnert Park, ask them to build communities, not just houses.
That's a great point. They are going to build, I think that empty piece of land on the far side of the green building, I think that's zoned commercial, but obviously hasn't been built yet.
I have a question. There's been, now that you said that the railroads are federal, so I know there's different funding and rules with that. What has become a big issue is Woodward, that there's the curb is red, there's a do not park. Every single time I try to leave my house and turn, there's a car blocking there. So then you have to pull out completely into traffic to be able to see. So is there any special funding through the railroad, through federal, that we could get to add safety to the town? That, you know, we could maybe pull funding from somewhere else, because it does make you, as your car, you have to pull out physically onto the railroads and stop so you can make sure nobody's going because your vision is totally blocked.
That's a great point, and that was one of the reasons why we remember there used to be a crossing arm there that used to fall on the cars. So we moved that because we listened to the community and we put double gates on the crossing itself. We could talk to the landowner about shaving back the corner to the best of their ability to make sure that there's some visibility there and more enforcement if someone's parking in a red zone. But yeah, no, I appreciate that. That also points to lack of parking, and you know that's another approach, right? Try to find some additional parking.
I'll stand up. I'm just for all the residential areas that are along Petaluma Hill, that empty onto Petaluma Hill Road, where we have no obligation to get out of we can't get out of our neighborhood unless we turn left or right. So I don't know if your studies take into account the experience of trying to do that. It's like merging onto a freeway from a dead stop at a 90-degree angle and you have no ramp. So I don't know if, I'm in Cannon Manor. I know this is a problem all along Petaluma Hill Road, but for us, there's a light at Roberts Road and there's a light at East Katati. And invariably, you may get traffic that is stopped going one direction, but if you're turning left, you have to wait until the opposing traffic stops. And by then, the oncoming traffic has come in. It seems like low-hanging fruit. Can you time the lights and give us a break to just get some of the side streets to empty onto the road?
Thank you for that. We've had that issue. I know I have that issue down on Lakeville as well. If you live on Lakeville, you'll never make a left. You always just got to take a right. And even then, I think sometimes accidents occur because there's so much traffic that people make a quick decision thinking they can make it out. So pulsing the lights would be a great one. I know that in California, though, right turn on red means that you need to have all red. Is that right, Frank? Hold on.
On a right ball, on a red ball, you can make a right turn on red, not an arrow.
Thanks, Frank.
I live on Adobe, and I'm with many of you on Adobe making a left onto Redwood, and so see many of the parents bringing their kids to school. So can you expand on the school busing, what that entails, it being county, not a city? Can you comment on that to educate us further?
Only to the extent that it's a school district, independently elected, that they would run that. Shannon, is there bus service at all right now at no.
School board meeting is the second Tuesday of every month.
There you go. Second Tuesday of every month. Oh, there you go. We're
Penngrove at junior high arrives at 3 o'clock, so there's not only elementary school, but there's junior high parents, and then about an hour later, there's high school that all come to Penngrove Elementary. Thank you.
It's okay, the Kenilworth's right there, we don't provide busing. Cost is right there, we don't provide busing. I'm not allowed to say that.
You know, to be fair, the school traffic issue is countywide, especially in the unincorporated area. It's always a little dicey because we don't have sidewalks, and you always have rural areas, and you have different traffic volumes than you had previously. And I think the other side of that, I think that it's true here in Penngrove, school enrollment is changing. Charter schools attracting people from throughout. We'll probably see more of that, to be honest, in the future than less. Look at, was it Dunham School or Dunbar School over in Sonoma that closed? With declining population, aging populations, fewer kids, they're reaching out as if they were a business to find new customers, and that's kind of the result of that. So here you go.
So I would like to vote that we have sidewalks there where that cement thing is. I almost got hit head on by a taxi company guy who was needing to pass into my lane. I'm heading north on out of Penngrove, and he needs to get here because of the bicyclist over there. I'm not against the bicyclist, but there's cars over here parked. If we don't have parked cars right next to that cement wall, and instead we have a sidewalk, I have more room to get out of the way. I don't know how come I'm here now, because that taxi guy was right here in my face. He needed to go faster than I did, I can see, for whatever reason, so please put a sidewalk.
We're glad you're here. We'll look into the additional cost of the sidewalk and how that would actually get funded. I will also say that sidewalks, to be honest, sidewalks in rural areas also have ADA issues because they have to go from somewhere to somewhere. Because if you consider, if you're in a wheelchair or if you're disabled, you have to be able to transfer, from spot to spot. So the county has also, we get sued every year for the 88 miles of sidewalks that we have, and under those circumstances. So.
My question is what about these developers that are developing all these houses and making the big bucks, and then they just go back to where they came from? They don't really care how the traffic is diverted or take care of that business when they build them. Why isn't the roads and everything taken into account and charged to the developer to take care of it if they're getting the Bay money? I mean, we're looking for money. Why don't we take some?
Again, theoretically, they do. Is it enough? No. Right, it's development impact fees, as I mentioned in. I will say, and I don't know if Rick's still here, Rohnert Park is the only city in the county that has paid a regional traffic impact fee, and that's to take care of the issues heading this way as well as heading towards in other jurisdictions and Cotati, to be honest. So that's part of that, but it's difficult. What we also need is to continue to make investments by the jurisdictions, and I think your county has. And we also need to make sure that we are always looking for those opportunities to leverage dollars.
I I get it, maybe not Petaluma Hill Road or Old Redwood Highway, but the side roads that are traveled, speed bumps are cheap, they don't take 3 years to put in, they could happen overnight.
What's, I know the fire chief's not here. He might have a different opinion on speed bumps. How have we dealt with speed bumps in the county, Janice?
Yeah, we do have a speed bump policy. It's on our website, and you could look at it for if your road qualifies. I will say it is difficult to qualify because it's very disruptive to traffic. And so anyway, it's on our website, and you could look if you qualify, and we would work with you to see if you meet the qualifications.
That's a huge issue. We have Laughlin Road, right? Where on the other side of Laughlin Road up in by Santa Rosa is Mesa Beverage. And how often was a 18-wheel truck sent down Laughlin Road as a shortcut until it got to the bridge that is at a 90-degree angle, and it would get jackknifed and stuck there, and the bridge would be shut down. TPW put up some great vulture signs to warn people of that, but that's part of the problem with the apps. To the speed bumps again, because we've had instances in the county elsewhere, and what comes with speed bumps, just so you know, is, well, you have to get by law enforcement, fire, and EMS, because quite honestly, they don't like them. And then you also have to, the noise that comes from it. If people don't see it, if it's out in front of your house, you'll hear a lot of, cars getting a little air, landing hard. And so I get those excuses or complaints as well. Let me go back this way. I'm going to go to, I believe, someone who hasn't asked yet.
Good evening. Thanks for coming tonight. I want to piggyback on the lady's question over there about the funding. We have the, I believe, you can let me know, is it not the federal government and the state then is directed to build, build, build? There's nothing wrong with building. But what are they doing when they're building and demanding that? The builders can only punch in so many dollars. Why are we not talking to the federal government who tells the state, you need to build, 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 give us some money for the effects of the building? There's nothing wrong with building, but it's like, hey, you guys build these developments down here, but forget about what you're doing and the cause and effect of it is. I just think we need to petition the state, the senators, who, to say, look, build, but you've got to make amenities that goes with that building.
I appreciate that. Janice, can you talk about federally qualified roads and that within the local road network? Because it's really a county, it's a local issue as well as some state dollars that we're talking about.
Yeah, so we do have a few federally eligible roads, and they're the larger roads, the major collectors or arterials that are federally funded. But they're few and far between.
And the state dollars, I can tell you that I've been in Sacramento a couple times, and I've been to DC twice, meeting with Pete Buttigieg, the transportation, right? And there's the bipartisan infrastructure bill. There's more money that filled up all the existing pots. I'll be honest, the problem is all those pots are competitive grant programs. So they're refilled, and there's more money in them, which theoretically means that you can perhaps go and get the dollars maybe a little easier. But the last time we were there, we were in the Department of Transportation. They were telling us what used to be oversubscribed by a ratio of 3-to-1 is now oversubscribed by a ratio of 7-to-1. So everyone was waiting for this bipartisan infrastructure bill to pass, thinking all this money will flow down to us who need it, and not quite yet. I'm not saying, and Brian was here from the Golden Gate Bridge, we got $400 million towards a $1 billion seismic upgrade project at the bridge. That's great. But at the local level, it's really dollars that are sourced locally or from the state. And again, some of our state ratios and programs don't quite hit. And I will also share, I'm a commissioner of the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. That's where the money comes through for the 9-county Bay Area. And I'm currently the chair of programming and allocation, so it comes through my committee. And it's difficult. It's difficult to really find those dollars. And I tell you right now, there's a transit crisis because of the pandemic. And I don't know if you saw that. They're looking to scrape off about $5.5 billion from transportation funds to put towards operating funds in transit. So that creates another headache because that's less money that'll be available for other programs. Whoop. Coming the long way.
Thank you. My question is partially for Janice as a follow-up to my earlier comment. I'm a mom with 2 kiddos. I live on Woodward. I walk my kindergartner every day to Penngrove Elementary. She asked me if she could ever walk to school. I said, absolutely not. I will hold your hand through 6th grade, much to her embarrassment, but that's the way it is right now. My question, going back to my concern with the parking lot, right? And I understand that's private land. I understand we have federal. I understand we have the railroad. My experience has been, because I live right here on Woodward, right across the street, actually, I spend a lot of time putting my local dollars into downtown Penngrove because I love it. And so I want to be able to continue to do that, as I know my neighbors do, but there's a real safety concern on this main street. And I know I really appreciate the website. I put in my comments there. I read a lot of the comments. I know that there's a big dedication and interest to redirecting, doing whatever we can do to make this through traffic undesirable for those people to pass through, so that if there is a parking lot and they're going across the street, that it's done safely. I'm fine with a parking lot. If those people are here to spend dollars in Penngrove Market, at our local shops, at the pub, whatever that is, but we want to do that safely. So in terms of the railroad and that being governed by Fed, is there a certain distance where you could put in something? Because again, on the survey, lots of folks are asking for crosswalks, safety measures for our kids, for our locals, and for our kids to walk to school. So is there a distance, perhaps it's not right on Woodward, perhaps it's a little bit further down, where there can be some safety measures, not a light, but maybe flashing crosswalks, something, so people can utilize our downtown safely. That was my main question.
I think that's a great point. We'll look into what we can do on the pedestrian side, how far away from the tracks itself, and the queue cutter, which is to keep cars from stalling on the tracks, which is vitally important. Janice, anything?
Yeah, just comment noted. We're going to include it as part of the study. We will look into it, and it will be a great effort to coordinate with the federal rail, but that doesn't mean we don't do it. We will definitely look into it and see what we can do.
Great, thank you.
Hi, thank you. My name is Morgan. I live on Eli Road. So if you might not believe it, but if you add up your gas taxes, your registration fee, your new car sales tax, all of your car-based fees, they pay for less, or about half of the cost of roads. And that doesn't even factor in when you get in a crash, not an accident, a crash, and you run up $1 million worth of medical bills, and the other driver has $15,000 of insurance. That other $985 has to come from somewhere. Okay? That's the public paying for that. People older folks can't drive anymore, people with disabilities can't drive anymore. They are paying for half of the roads, and they don't drive. So the idea that Main Street here has 2 through traffic lanes, 2 sides of parking, and 1 4-foot sidewalk is an outrage. And the idea that we don't have enough money to put in a second sidewalk because we devoted, 40 feet of road space to cars is an outrage. And the idea that kids can't get to school because we've devoted all this road space to cars and we're going to put in another lane, it's an outrage. Where are the sidewalks? Kids, she can't drive yet. How are kids supposed to be able to get anywhere? How are kids supposed to be able to walk to Penngrove Market? They have to cross the street 2 places to walk to Penngrove Market. It's absurd. Your tax dollars are not being spent if you're being encouraged at every turn to drive your car everywhere possible. Thank you.
Thank you.
On Ronsheimer, if you're coming from Cotati and you're coming into town in Penngrove, there's the sign that says that there is actually a Ronsheimer Road is either non-existent, in disrepair, has fallen down, or otherwise covered by the brush. That's a blind curve, people driving 50 miles an hour who have no idea or don't pay attention that there's Ronsheimer Road, and there's people coming down that road that either try to make a left turn to go to Cotati or a right turn to go to Petaluma. That road, that little area there on Ronsheimer where it meets Old Redwood Highway is also used as a U-turn from both north and south. People pull in there, you have people coming down Ronsheimer to make the left or right turn, and the people are pulling in from Old Redwood Highway to make a U-turn. So if they can just at least fix that sign that says that there's Ronsheimer Road, I mean, what does it take, a shovel and some concrete?
Got it. Duly noted. Signage on the vegetation on the sign, and then do you do no U-turn sign? There's an intersection there, so you can do a no U-turn? And that's pretty straightforward? Okay.
How about it when you go, oops, sorry.
These meetings are dangerous.
When you cross the street from the Penngrove Market to the post office, and the lights are going, and people are supposed to stop, and no one stops for you. And they're looking at their phones, and they're just speeding through, and then you think, well, somebody stops, and all of a sudden you see the guy coming up behind him, and he's going to wham him. And, you know, God knows where they're going to end up in my face, and, you know, it's scary. The lights don't stop people. They don't stop.
Okay, let's take that note. SoCo.
So the way we address problems is kind of a three-pronged approach, which is education, engineering, and enforcement. So the engineering at that crosswalk, we've looked into it, we've added, it's pedestrian activated, there's lights, there's striping. I understand that it's not enough, so it's time for those other two prongs of a global approach to safety projects to be enacted. So additional enforcement and education, coming to meetings like this, and sharing with your community about the problem. It's really hard for me. I'm sorry it's happening, but I don't get to control human behavior. So that area in downtown Penngrove has a lot of infrastructure. It's got rail, it's got a crosswalk. There are a lot of signs there now, and we have to balance that.
We'll make a note to the commander to ask him to take particular attention to that. So I do think that it's primarily an enforcement thing. I recognize that. Appreciate it. I'll be right back.
Quick note, making the commander, I'm guessing CHP. Every time I've called CHP for anything in Penngrove, I've been told, we just don't have the resources. Oh, we're sorry, we can't do a thing, and you call sheriff, and they tell you, that's not our problem, you need to call CHP. So, on another note, and sadly, most of the people left here, but it comes down to convenience. If you can make it so inconvenient for the cut-through traffic to come through, they will stop coming. They will just stop. One way to make it inconvenient, I live on Dutch Lane between Davis and Brand. I mean, a lot of these people are my neighbors. If you were to cul-de-sac Dutch at Davis, there would be no cut-through traffic. They would literally either have to take railroad out, and that's a roll of the dice. Railroad's a dangerous street. It's barely wide enough for two cars, and it's undulation, and it's really bad. they would end up staying on Adobe to Pet Hill. And a tearaway cul-de-sac, so fire and emergency vehicles can drive right through. Plastic pylons, they have springs in the base. Emergency vehicles drive over them, they pop right back up. You or I drive over them, it's a $1,500 ticket.
No, I got you. And actually, our office we've done that. And I'll ask you, if you want that, talk to your neighbors. Have all your neighbors agree to that they're going to now have not a through street, but a cul-de-sac. And I'm more than happy to push that forward. And I'm speaking over our engineering manager. We did that over by the casino when it first opened because people were afraid that all the traffic was going to come down their streets. So we put bollards, EVA at the end, so we can look at that. I mean, I was going to say that earlier. That is the ultimate, it's kind of the nuclear option is to not have a through road, and people won't use it.
Could we consider putting stop signs where Old Redwood Highway meets Adobe Road? Because there's a crosswalk there, but people are driving at 50 miles per hour, and there's people walking dogs, walking kids to school, crossing the crosswalk, but there's only one stop sign instead of 3.
Appreciate that. Any comments on stop signs on roads such as that, as opposed to a signal or a roundabout or some other mechanism?
I think we've already received that same comment, so thank you. And it's something we can study. And again, we have to follow warrants for stop sign installation, but we can definitely look and investigate if a stop sign there meets warrants.
Yeah, please.
And what about bumpered, instead of a full sidewalk, because I understand that that's a lot more expensive and more to get approved, but the bumpers that exist over there, could we get more of those at least?
Where?
Everywhere, Old Redwood Highway, on Adobe. Something would be better than nothing.
So we can look into it. I don't know, there has to be some roadway width, right? So you have traveled lanes, and then you want a shoulder to allow a little bit of vehicles who veer and correct. So you want to give them room to do that. After that, you could put what we call an AC dike, an asphalt dike, and some ped area, but I don't know if the existing road widths can support that design.
I think on Old Redwood Highway, there's plenty of space for something like that. There's a lot of people that are walking all the time on there. And at least the suggestion that cars have to stay in their lanes would be comforting.
No, appreciate that, thank you. And we'll look into that. I was going to ask Colin or Frank, do you guys do bicycle counts and pedestrian counts on any of these road segments, or is it strictly vehicles?
Yeah, all the counts also included bicycles and pedestrians.
Okay, that'll be interesting to see, at least on the pedestrian side, to see where people are, their origin and destination, ideally, if we can get there.
Thanks for the mural, by the way. Here's my question. As a resident who lives right off of Old Redwood Highway, how are the proposed 4 lanes on Old Redwood going to keep us safer?
It was an old recommendation, correct?
Just so you know, we're not actively pursuing that. This was mentioned in a general plan from 23 years ago. We're not currently pursuing it.
Yeah, and as was mentioned on the general plans, so the general plan has a build out, and that's everything within your community that you've zoned accordingly, and magically it will all be built within 20 years. So how do you mitigate all that growth? You have these traffic improvements over here in this column, but as was mentioned earlier, what happens is I haven't seen a general plan that has ever reached build out, especially in this county, to be honest. And so many of those projects either aren't funded or aren't even required because there's no traffic to mitigate at that level for those. So that's how that works in that whole system.
Thank you, sir. Can we address the Freitas Parkway and Adobe Road down there? I think if they blocked off somewhere where the through traffic coming from Sacramento, I'm sorry? yeah, Highway 80 and all that, if they maybe somewhere along didn't make it a drive-through, that I think it's going to take care of two problems. A lot of the traffic congestion off of Pelham Hill Road and all that stuff. Also, these 5,000-pound cars are not wrecking the road. It's these 80,000-pound trucks, and Adobe Road was really a stagecoach road. It was designed to be anything for big stuff. So we'd be getting more bang for our buck if we kept those big, heavy vehicles out. I don't think the 3,000-4,000-pound car is going to hurt the road.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. We're actually pursuing through the CHP a truck restriction, or we're not pursuing, we're discussing truck restrictions on Lakeville Highway, that much the same. And you're right, that a lot of our roads, probably the local roads around here, you could imagine they were dirt, they had gravel or rock on it at one time. When someone decided that they should throw some asphalt on it, they probably just threw it over what was already there. So there's no real structural section to that road. And maybe it took the old cars that were lighter, but it doesn't take today's, and certainly the refuse trucks, as you could imagine, over at the side of the road, bending off and peeling off the side, it does havoc. And so Janice is great in her shop, but sometimes we get requests to pave roads, and it would be like throwing money away, to be honest, right? Because there's no structural section there. So you have to go back and rebuild that road, which of course is what, 9 times as expensive? And that perpetuates that problem. But I appreciate the comment. And at Freitas, I was surprised to learn that Freitas was it number 1 unincorporated, or 2, or it was in the top 3, right, Colin? Yeah, and right now it's a 3-way stop, and the solution for that is signalization. Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot there.
You know, so I came from the East Bay today, and because that intersection, because there's such a queue with the stop signs, I'm pretty sure my phone sent me another way because of that. Where, you know, if you signalize it, it might fix the problem and send people down, more people down Adobe.
Yeah, I was surprised to see that one listed as dangerous as it was, because I go that way often, and I know that there's been horrible accidents up by the Bentonellis and up that stretch, but not really at the intersection. Yeah, that's unimproved there.
2 things I wanted to mention is my neighbor who mentioned the money from the Roanoke Park lawsuit that was available for traffic mitigation, I believe has so far gone to bike paths. And I may be wrong. If I am, please correct me. But I think that the community would see the money in sidewalks and stop signs as a better use of those funds. My second point is when you talked about the sidewalk in Penngrove where the hillside is going to be reworked, that the sidewalk has to go somewhere. Well, it would. It would go from the new parking lot to Penngrove Hub, which businesses have no way to get there. And as far as the sidewalk being ADA compliant, anyone who is differently abled cannot get anywhere near that side of the street or go from one business to another, downtown Penngrove. So any sidewalk would be a vast improvement for a differently abled person. Thank you.
Yeah, ironically, if you don't have the sidewalk, you're not liable, but if you do, you are, for the origin and destination on that. And again, sidewalks are, and I think even in, I could be wrong with a couple buildings, for the most part, they're all in front of occupied or built structures along the commercial strip. And certainly the county was the one who put the sidewalk in on the one side of the street some years ago. And as to the funds, no, I have those figures somewhere. There's $5.75 million that is programmed, not spent, because we've only collected $3.63 million. And these are it's about $3,000 a home for the homes in certain, plus or minus, because it varies by the subdivision. And this was a development agreement, again, that Roanoke Park did with the developers of those subdivisions, Willow Glen University District, Southeast, I believe that is. And that was collected, and that did come out of a lawsuit that was between 2 private entities that sued Roanoke Park, nothing to do with the county. And the result of that lawsuit was, and it's broadly, and people think that it's specifically for Penngrove. And it's broad, the language is broader than that. And that's the way that it has been spent. And so the $1 million that went to, and I know a lot of people got upset with the $1 million contribution to the $13 million path that's going to come in to Penngrove. I see that as an amenity for the town. And in fact, if you own property along Oak, up in that area that backs down, you'll have access to very safe path right to the market. And it would be great if someone who owns property along that stretch would sell an easement and create a path for the street coming down that that whole neighborhood could actually access. So maybe instead of walking down this street, you can walk down to the pathway and go to the market. That's a solution that could be out there. So if you own property, think about it. There could be something in it for you, and we could pursue that. Again, the mitigation dollars, $3,000 a house is a lot if you're buying the house. It's not a lot if you're trying to install 2 traffic signals, a roundabout, 12 stop signs, and God knows what, and sidewalks and everything else, to be honest, right? That's why I mentioned before, the smart way that that money is utilized is, I think, is the way that we've done it. It's been leveraged up to about 22 million plus by coupling it with other funding sources. So, you know, $1 million was spent out of that fund for that trail that comes into Penngrove. That was a $13 million project. I think that's not a bad investment. This traffic study tonight is being funded by that fund. The railroad corridor is being funded by that fund. That railroad corridor is the whole diversion thing that Rick talked about earlier, that in any future freeway interchange, that has to be studied, and that will come out of that particular study. The 2 traffic signals that we talked about come out of those funds that are programmed going forward. So there have been, I think, you know, 5 Penngrove specific projects that are very beneficial to Penngrove. And that's, you know, if the language was restricted, it would have been different.
One more quick question. I want to tag along. A gentleman earlier asked about the cameras. At our last meeting here, it was 2 o'clock on a Sunday, I brought that up. How difficult will it be to get cameras? I mean, you come from Petaluma Hill Road, you come down to Dutch, it's supposed to drop to 40. Good luck in your dreams. Okay, there's a big sign there, it says 40. They zoom on right through that, then they come downtown. And again, we have a lot of kids going to school. I don't have any children going to school here, but it's a huge factor. They come down here where the blinking light is at the crosswalk, and they ignore that and zoom through it. If we had cameras, which would be a relatively inexpensive thing compared to others like we have in San Francisco, we have on the major freeways, bingo, and you get your ticket in the mail. I mean, it sounds simple, but I'm just saying it's a deterrent that we've got to look into. If it hurts your pocketbook, you're going to think twice about speeding through here.
Well, that last part is true. Cameras aren't cheap, and the whole mechanism behind them. San Francisco does them. It's San Francisco. It's hard to compare. The freeway doesn't really, or the 101, not 101, but the state highway system doesn't really do enforcement cameras. They have cameras for traffic flow. I don't know of any that really, and I'm on, again, those committees. They bill you for the express lanes, but they don't necessarily send you a ticket if you're going 65 or 70 miles an hour. Okay.
Memory refresher, you said to reach out to Senator Padilla about something, and I forgot.
Oh, God bless you. It's a really exciting thing, but the Penngrove lift station is at the low spot of the system, and there's a $2 million earmark that's on his desk to do additional work to make it flood-proof. And it's about a $2.7 million project overall, and you're all probably in the Penngrove sanitation zone, so that will benefit you greatly because it won't come out of your rates. It'll come out of the federal government's pocket, which would be a great way to go. And our office can get you a contact on that too.
Thanks, Supervisor Rabbit, and again for everything you've done. And I think we've lost sight of something here, though, that's a priority, and so many people coming and going. Our prior board in the community was very clear that we were looking at emergency services response times and access shutdowns. That was completely overlooked in the process. Everybody's trying to do the right thing, but there wasn't a completely thorough due diligence search of the contemporaneous records. There's nothing more important than our lives and the protection of our properties. Mr. Moretti's here. They're going to get stuck with this. In all due respect to you, you're not going to be here when most of this rolls out and materialized, and we may have 2 or 3 more people. I'll be gone. You got more time than I do, David, but But for God's sake, and sure, who doesn't love bicycles? That's not the point. We just don't have the same priorities or values, and we need to get that realigned and make sure that it's all, in order of events and what's first priority. We all love bicycles, for God's sake. Thank you.
Thank you. Once upon a time, I rode a bicycle. That was about 50 pounds ago. Just it's too bad the fire chief isn't still here, but he would tell you that the fire response times, the emergency response times are still being met.
No, I meant in the future.
Well, yeah, that's obviously, yeah.
Hi, my name's Angela. I've lived here my whole life, grew up right down the street. Now my kids are growing up in the same house I did. So that's really rare, by the way. I don't know if anyone knows that. I'm a business owner downtown in Penngrove. And it's been really rough with this traffic, you guys. I mean, I literally now work down there 7 days a week, and I see it every day. And I have children that go to Penngrove School, and I can't even take my kid to school. I literally drive my daughter from Oak Street to the school because it's safer, because I've almost gotten hit in the crosswalk 3 times in the last 6 months. So I would really appreciate another crosswalk in Penngrove. I'm sure a lot of people would. I know that there is budgets and all different things, but whatever we can do, that would be great. And also, if we could get some kind of sidewalk, I have a lot of customers that are coming from different areas now and benefiting Penngrove. And I think that if they could get here safely, not running across the street, jaywalking, and almost getting hit and saying, oh my God, I really like that lamp, but I almost died over it. And that would be great if we could put something in on that side, because literally have one side of Penngrove that's safe. And I know that you guys are putting in this bike area for biking, right? Correct? Who's doing that? Yeah, I think that's amazing. Is that also for pedestrians to walk as well? So here's my problem. I see a lot of bikes every day flying down the street, and they go fast. And if I'm gonna be walking next to them with my child, that's not safe for me, not safe enough. So if we could please get some more safety in Penngrove, I'd really appreciate it. And I thank you guys.
Thank you very much. The one good thing about, obviously if it's in the appropriate place, the one good thing about crosswalks, it's paint, and paint is relatively cheap. So I think that's great. I'll tell you what, we get one more. Let's try to wrap it up, and I very much appreciate everyone's patience.
Thanks again. I remember back in the late 70s, early 80s, when we were younger then, we had to lay down and do a sacrificial human crosswalk because the county felt that we wanted a crosswalk between the store and the post office, and they said, no, we can't do that. It gives everybody a false sense of security. So, you're not volunteering, right? Well, I'm too old now. but again, I think somewhere along in the engineering thing, they're more interested in the vehicles and the amount of traffic that can get through instead of the people who actually live here. And so, if it wasn't for Helen Putnam being embarrassed like that, and that was the only, well, we had a bunch of school kids, we put crosswalks in there, and when people were walking from the grocery stores, the 4th of July parade, I believe it was, and they were walking back and forth, and that was the only time I ever seen a county truck down there in Penngrove cleaning that stuff up.
Well, it's been down here more than that, but we'll leave it at that. Again, I want to say any last comment or question? No, you do, because there's people online that want to hear.
A lot of towns and a lot of cities, they will paint the speed limit on the pavement itself, or something that just says slow down. That's just paint. There's no reason why we can't have that in Penngrove. School zone ahead. People will see these things. Other cities do it. Other counties do it. It's paint. We have painters. If not, I'll volunteer.
We did add the, after that meeting we had at the school, we did add additional, and we repositioned the school zone signs. So do we have a policy on placing anything on the pavement in terms of slow, or we'll figure that out. Okay. Well, I got to, Frank, Thank you so much. All right, I'm going to use this one. I just want to thank everyone again, those that weathered the storm and stayed to the end. You know, I want to find prioritization, consensus on projects to move forward. This report undoubtedly will have a laundry list of things that we can do and probably should do, but at some point, if we're going to implement something, what's the top priority things that we need to put in there? And that's what I really want us to work on. I mean, there is a big laundry list, but we got to winnow it down. Doesn't mean it goes away, it just stays in that report. You know, I'm an architect. I like to get things built and done. I don't want to have a report on, no offense, I don't want to have the report on the shelf and not have the improvements that come from it. So I want to make sure that we can continue and make the biggest bang for the buck moving forward. And I ask for your, quite honestly, your patience, continued patience. And I know it's frustrating, but at this point, you know, there's a process in place that we're getting there. The traffic signals, I don't know if the county's running into the same thing. There's a over on Rollbur Road, they've been waiting for the traffic arms for months and months because of logistics and fabrication and everything else. So all this stuff kind of comes into play. But if it's funded, it's getting built, and we look forward to that, and we look forward to those improvements. But thank you so much for being here. Thank you for, again, I'll thank you for your passion. As Parks and Rec said, I heard you very loudly, and we'll take that and we'll go forward, and have a good night. I don't know if the Warriors won or lost. Anyone? Or if people are recording it, I won't say. But anyway, thanks for being here. Appreciate it. See you soon.